This here is the Cinema Products 16R. If you know anything about this camera and if you've done research, you might be wondering, why am I calling it the 16R, not the full name? Well, I don't want the video to get flagged, and Cinema Products...
Y'all gotta change that name.
The story of this camera goes back all the way to 1942, when Oricon released what was one of the first widely available 16mm sound on film cameras for newsreels, documentary, all sorts of things. So with the exception of, I suppose, the RCA 16mm camera in the late 20s or early 30s, the Oricon was one of the first 16mm cameras to offer sound on film optical recording, which is where 16mm film that has single perforations down only one side has optical sound recorded on the other side where the other perforations would have gone. This was a huge step forward because it allowed for the sound and picture to be recorded in the same device, albeit with separate amplifiers which had to be plugged in. The design of the Oricon camera, especially the threading pattern, was copied by both, with permission, this company here, Cinema Products, and another one which made a very similar camera called Frezzolini. This design that Oricon came out with in the 1940s was still alive and well in the early and mid 70s. It just changed with the times. So this model doesn't do optical sound, instead magnetic stripes of sound recording tape down the side of the film. But that's no longer in production, so most of them have had that removed, and they're just used as a standard camera with sound being recorded separately. So the main features of this camera are either a 170 degree half moon mirror shutter or 156 degree bow tie shutter. The predecessor to this didn't feature this mirrored shutter, and instead it had reflex viewing via a dogleg finder and a prism inside the lens, which is not as good and can lead to some degradation in the image, because the more things that you're putting between the lens elements and the film are just going to lead to issues. So this is a better model. It has variable speeds between 12.5 to 37.5 frames per second and a crystal speed of either 24 or 25 frames per second, which can be changed with some tools and just changing a little wheel inside. So unlike the Oricon, this didn't have its own proprietary magazines. Well, it did, but the mount was a classic one. They used the Mitchell standard 16mm mount in their funky new plastic shells. Although, unlike the Mitchells, these ones had little hinge doors here instead of a screw-on circular door. Now, the standard magazines on these were 400 foot, although I believe with the Mitchells, maybe you could have put 1200 feet on there with their larger magazines that were available. But these days, that's not really viable because you can't get more than 400 foot of 16mm negative film unless you do a special order with Kodak, which isn't really that feasible and is very expensive, sadly, because it would be nice to shoot over half an hour in one go. So no, you just have the 400 foot these days, and that gets you, 10, 11 minutes, depending on your frame rate. The magazines are very easy to load. The camera, not so much, but once you get used to it, it's quite simple, and it's a more classic threading design. It doesn't do too many complicated things. It has a chart where you can see on the door how to do it properly. Now, what I like about these is they're really well soundproofed. They're quieter than the Eclair and a lot of other 16mm cameras that were in use at the time. They are a little chunky, but they sit beautifully on a tripod. They're really well balanced for that. For handheld use, they don't really sit on your shoulder that well. Maybe they did have a cushion attachment that you could have put on it, but I mean, it is possible. So what really separated this one from the previous 16mm sound cameras of the 40s and 50s was that it, as well as shooting magnetic sound instead of optical, it had its amplifier built into the camera body. There was no separate unit that you had to plug into AC. You could plug the microphones directly into here. It had the mixer. It was all inbuilt, which was really invaluable. And It ran off nickel, some kind of a nickel rechargeable battery. When this camera was released, it was aimed at news gathering, it was aimed at documentary shooters, short TV dramas, maybe some commercials. It wasn't really being used for feature films, but definitely some television production, especially for news, because it could shoot sound and picture at the same time. In fact, my camera here did start its life as, I believe, a Channel 9 camera here in Melbourne, and then it went to a rental house, and then it was leased out to a film school in the 90s, where it was used to shoot 16mm student films, and probably where my viewfinder got trashed from falling off the tripod a few times, I'll bet. Then somebody was going to put it in a dumpster or something, someone saved it, and then I got it on eBay for a good deal a couple of years ago. I did have to fix it up. I replaced the belt that runs the take-up inside of the camera. The motor drive belt was okay. I also had to make up my own battery solution. So the main positive points about this camera are that it can shoot crystal speed. It has a nice ingenue zoom lens usually on it in their proprietary mount. It has quite good viewfinder optics and it's very bright. It's quite well made, very, very quiet. It's one of the quieter cameras I've ever used. And you will rarely hear it in a recording unless you're really close to the microphone with it. The main thing for me is these are really affordable, at least at the moment. I hope I don't make the prices skyrocket. I'm sorry if I do, but I do think that this camera needs a little bit more attention because it's really overlooked quite often, and it's very capable. It can shoot stunning footage. I shot a whole short film on it last year, primarily on this, and over an hour and 20 minutes were at least put through this one in that, and the footage came out amazing. It's a really brilliant camera. All that being said, there are a couple downsides. I'll run you through those now. Now, the first one is the power. Originally, it had a nickel battery, a rechargeable one, which had, 10 or 20 AA sized cells inside. Now, they've all melted by now, and if you do have one with the camera, and you can get a resold one or have it resold, but personally, I never went down that route. Now, the thing that makes it hard is it takes 20 volts, because that was what the voltage added up to with the way that the cells were wired in the battery. 20 volts isn't very compatible with a lot of modern batteries such as V-mount, which is either 14.6 or maybe 26 volts depending on which one you have. I guess maybe I could run it off a type of power tool battery, but in the meantime I just took a little laptop charger, an Acer 19 volt laptop charger. It's close enough to 20 volts. It seems to run it just fine. So I just run that off my AC outlet out of the wall without issue. I have the Eclair NPR and a few other cameras if I really do need to take it out of the studio and away from any power access. But I use this primarily for any dialogue I have to shoot because my Eclair motor is playing up a little bit. Another big downside for a lot of people would be that it doesn't have a PL mount. It has the Cinema Products proprietary mount. There aren't a lot of lenses available for that. There are a few, but generally I wouldn't get this camera unless it comes with a lens because you're going to have a hard time finding one, and for a fair price. Another thing that might scare a few people, especially if they're new to shooting on film, is the threading process for this one. It's not quite as simple as something like a Bolex, for example. As I did mention before, it is quite easy once you get the hang of it. But a positive side of the threading process is that you can open the door in between shots and check the gate for dust, or you can easily check that the threading is correct if you're unsure about anything. Another downside is that it is a little bit heavy and not very easily shoulder mounted. As I mentioned, it is good for the tripod. It balances better than the Eclair on the tripod, but yeah, for handheld it's not really ideal, and it is a little bulky. Also, because it's belt driven, you may have to replace a belt at some point. And inside the camera there are a lot of circuit boards which could have issues down the track. They do have a mercury battery inside, which was to let you know when it was about to run out of film. Those batteries can have a tendency to leak inside and damage the board, so you will need to open it up at some point or have someone do so and remove that. just with some pliers. Another thing is that I think it's a magnesium body. It can have some corrosion over time, especially from humidity or salty air. It's not really a big deal, but cosmetically it may chip and the paint could fall off in some spots. In summary, it's a really affordable camera that you can use to shoot a narrative, documentary, interview footage, anything like that. It's far more affordable than other cameras that can do the same things. Way cheaper than an Arton, Eclair, Arri, SR2, whatever. It isn't often Super 16. You may be able to get it done in Ultra 16 if you know the right people. Super 16 has been done on these. It's not very cheap, but it can be done. I've even seen it converted to Super 16 with PL mount and video tap, possibly. So anything's possible. And if you get this camera, you can always have it upgraded down the track. Having crystal speed capability is the main benefit of this, and that really does put it ahead of a lot of other things in that price range. The variable speeds are handy. Obviously those won't be holding crystal sync, only your sync speed, which is either 24 or 25 frames per second. Again, the battery and power issue can scare off people, but like I said, I run mine off a laptop charge and it seems to do just fine for me. One interesting feature about this is that it can be turned on and off from the front and the back separately. You have to turn it off with the one that you switch it on with, but it is handy to have access at both points. The viewfinder is orientable. It will spin 360. Mine has been smashed up by the film school people back in the 90s, so it's held together by gaffer tape. But it's really bright still, and I don't really have many issues. It's not as orientable as some other viewfinders. You can't move it away from the body so much. So if you're left eye sighted, you might have trouble with this one. That's something to keep in mind. In this day and age, who is this camera for? Well, originally it was a news and documentary camera. These days, I think it is a good documentary camera if you were going to shoot a 16mm documentary. It's good for short films, narratives, anything really where you need dialogue, it's going to shine. It'll only come short if you really do need that widescreen and you want anything wider than a 4x3. Then it's probably not the camera for you unless you want to get it converted and have the money to do so. One thing I will say is that you should really make sure that you're getting the 16R if you are getting one of these and not the earlier model. The main thing will be the viewfinder. You'll see this one has a viewfinder coming off the camera body. The earlier one, the viewfinder comes off the camera lens, or just like that. The early one you really don't want to get unless that doesn't bother you. This is definitely the better one of the two. I'll show you some clips I shot on it now. If you've used one of these in the past or recently, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you're wondering anything about it, you can also ask a question. Go ahead and I'll reply. Thank you for watching and happy shooting.